Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Cedarville Stories podcast. I'm Mark Weinstein, and today I'm joined by Marlee Benson to talk about Ohio State football's 2024 journey, a season marked by pressure, disappointment, and ultimately redemption. While the Buckeyes' pursuit of a national championship frames the conversation, this story goes much deeper, exploring faith and redemption that's found in Christ. Marlee and her husband, Matt, helped produce the Prime Video documentary Redemption, and today she'll share what unfolded behind the scenes. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Marlee Benson on this week's Cedarville Stories podcast. Marlee, congratulations on producing the documentary Redemption that used college football as a means to communicate God's grace and forgiveness in our society. How were you and Matt able to produce this documentary, or better yet, how were you selected to produce this documentary?
Yeah, I would say we were not equipped at all, but God is very gracious. So I can kind of tell you the origin story, and that might give you the answer. But we are big documentary people. First off, we're married. So Matt and I are married, and every evening we were watching documentaries. And so I don't know if you've heard of The Last Dance or Swamp Kings. There's a lot of sports docuseries coming out. And it was summer of 2024, and we were kind of binging these every night. And then a Sunday morning, we go to our church in Columbus. It's called One Church. And we hear G. Scott Jr. share his testimony. He was a tight end for Ohio State at the time. And I didn't really know much about the Ohio State team, but after listening to his testimony and kind of seeing a faith movement start on campus, I realized that, something was going on with this team. It was much more than just football. Like, each of them are so genuine and committed to their walk with Christ. And so we came home from that church service, and I was just thinking, all of these documentaries that we're watching are about sports, but they ride on the highs and lows of the seasons. And a lot of these athletes are kind of distraught after their career ends. But what if we could watch a documentary that showed the game of sports, but also something way bigger than that, something that's foundational, and that can give people hope beyond a game. And so that's kind of where the idea was born. But the only problem is Matt or I had no experience making a documentary or a movie of any kind. And so we had to make a few phone calls, and thankfully knew a production house in town, and honestly really just let God lead us through. But that's kind of how we got started. And
I want to dive into that a whole lot more as we keep going, but let me back up a little bit. So you said you weren't prepared, but I want to believe that your communications degree at Cedarville helped you a little bit in putting this together. You're, again, communication major. How did your education really help you to a degree in putting together this documentary?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, as I reflected on that, this is called Cedarville Stories. And I think in a lot of ways, yes, we can call it production. Yes, we can call it marketing or whatever you have you, but it really is storytelling at the end of the day. Right. And the object of this was to tell a really good story. And it is kind of funny. I remember being in meetings and Googling, like, in my computer where no one could see, executive producer definition. Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Yeah. But at the end of the day, really what we did was listen, a lot of listening and putting the pieces together. And so I think I did a lot of that, learned a lot of that at Cedarville. But I would say outside of my major, I think about Cedarville's core values, specifically excellence and effort. And I think there's a lot of ways you can go about making a movie, and there's a lot of opportunities to cut corners. But I continue in a variety of things I do reflect on that value and definitely carry it with me.
So when you felt called to make this documentary, what were the steps? You said you made a lot of phone calls. You learned a lot. What were those steps? Who did you call, and what did you learn that got you going initially, and then with each passing month or day?
Yeah, good question. The first call was to, like I said, a production house in town. They do a lot of brand work, but we knew they were believers. And although most of their work is for commercials, we thought there might be alignment there. And as soon as we called, it's called Serif Creative. They're a local Columbus production company. They were immediately excited and on board and said, let's get started. So we kind of had the film crew, a big check there. The next check was to raise the funds to produce something like this. And so My husband Matt owns eFuse. It's a software company. So he had some connections through there. And so we really just picked up the phone. People we knew were believers, people we knew were Ohio State fans and might, use those passions to want to give to something like this. And
Yeah.
so we really prayed before we started this project that it would be something that God wanted us to do. Both of us having full-time day jobs, we didn't necessarily know if we should take this on. And
Yeah.
within 24 hours after we started making those phone calls for financial resources, we were completely funded. And so we took that as a big green light to keep going. So those were kind of the two big blocks that we got through first.
Do you mind sharing, like, what does it take financially to produce a documentary like you produced?
Mm-hmm. Several hundred thousands of dollars.
Okay.
And that was all through really angel investors and a collection of under 10 people. And so these people were very passionate about those two things and were willing to take a risk on us. We said in the beginning, we can't guarantee this is going to be on any major platform, but we can guarantee that we feel a conviction to do this and we're going to do it the best we can. And thankfully that was enough for them to take a risk.
Were those investors, were they equally passionate about Jesus as they were about Ohio State football? Or was one did one weigh over the other?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, I think most of them were very equally on both. I think that they understood the calling of this and the ability it had to probably change people's lives. So thankfully, both.
Absolutely. And when it was released, you didn't know if it was going to be on any network or any platform. Where has it been distributed? Where have people been able to watch it?
Yeah, so you can watch it on Prime Video on the Wonder Project subscription right now, and hopefully other platforms soon. But right now, we're super thankful to have worked with the Wonder Project, and I can just speak to them. They're producing amazing content, both content that they're acquiring and content that they're creating, and really to give people hope and a good platform to watch family-friendly shows, which we appreciate. And so right now you can see it on Prime Video on the Wonder Project.
Okay. So when you first sensed the calling at church, when you heard the testimony of the Ohio State player, ultimately, what gave you the confidence to say yes, even though there were a lot of unknowns?
I think two things come to mind. One is I am married to someone who is a ready, fire, aim sort of approach to life. And so my first response was, let's pray on this for a few weeks. And his first response was, we should have started yesterday. And so I think that initially is what got the ball rolling. And the second thing I would say, and I think if you've experienced this in any capacity, you probably could relate, is that there's ideas that you can come up with on your own. And it feels like worthy of accomplishing, but it's going to take a lot of work. And then there are ideas that you have that you can almost see the end product before you even start. And this was one of those things that even though we had just had the idea, it seemed like within a couple hours, we could already see it coming to fruition. It was just a matter of obedience. And I'm not saying that to say it was easy, because there were definitely trials along the way.
Yeah.
But it was just such a strong conviction for the idea that I think we knew we wouldn't be obedient if we ignored that.
So this documentary, Redemption, obviously we've talked about some football players from Ohio State, and we'll get to that in a minute. But maybe even a bigger name is Tim Tebow. So how were you able to get Tim Tebow to be the voice of this documentary?
Yeah. We actually were connected with Tim through Matt's company, eFuse. Tim has a fund and they had invested in eFuse. So we had a relationship with them previously. And when we kind of brought this idea to them, we went down to Jacksonville and honestly, we just wanted to get his thoughts. This was before we had recorded anything. We were just kind of seeing, is this idea worth pursuing? And who better to talk about faith and football than Tim Tebow himself? And so we sat in a conference room, executive producers, our director, and Tim, and just kind of pitched him the idea to get his thoughts. And if you've been around him at all, anytime he speaks, it's a motivational locker room type of speech. And so he definitely gave us some feedback, good and bad, gave us all his thoughts on it. And it's funny, a little insider info is actually in that meeting. is where we came up with the name Redemption. We had a different title before then, but as he started talking, he said the word redemption. We all kind of looked at each other like that's it. That's exactly what the story's about. And so he definitely helped pave the way for what the documentary came to be, and we're thankful for that.
So was Tim on board right then as maybe being in the documentary, or what did it take to secure him in that important role?
Yeah, honestly, he was pretty on board from the beginning. There wasn't a ton of convincing. And I think because he was so closely tied to a story like this and also had some personal relationships with some of the players in the film, specifically Master Teague. Obviously, he has a relationship with Reese Davis. And so the people that were in the film, he knew off camera. And I think the story is almost better off camera because it's totally true. And each one of these guys, without getting into it quite yet, has a testimony that is so powerful. And so I think Tim, having known all of this off camera, was more than willing to talk about it on camera.
Yeah. When I read a story about redemption by one of the Cedarville University student PR writers, I read something that struck me as important, and that is there was a point when in your mind or in Matt's mind that the project went from this is something that would be meaningful to something that we really have a responsibility here to do and to share. What took it from a good idea to we have a responsibility to share what's going on with this football program that's bigger than life and bigger than football?
Mm-hmm. I think a question we kept coming back to when we were kind of crafting what the documentary would look like, we actually created an avatar. And this kind of, if I think back to Cedarville, I probably did a lot of this there too, but who is someone that's going to watch this film? And we came up with a guy named Brian, who was a fake guy, but in our head, it was someone who loved Ohio State football, was so passionate that he wouldn't miss a game.
Right.
That his mood really depended on the outcome of the game. But outside of football and work, like he feels pretty hopeless. He doesn't think about eternity a ton and maybe avoids thinking about God. So how can we get someone like him to sit down and watch a film that's about Ohio State football, but helps him walk away with the gospel truth?
Yeah.
And I think once we created the avatar and really put ourselves in the seats of people who would be watching this, that definitely gave us all the motivation we needed to keep going.
Yeah. So since the documentary's been out, what's been the feedback that you've received? How are people responding to it? Not just about football and a feel-good story because Ohio State won the national championship that year, but more so any spiritual, any eternal impact that you've heard of.
Yeah. I'm happy to report we haven't heard of any negative feedback, and I'm sure it's out there somewhere. I mean, people don't love the Michigan sequence, but we don't have to talk about that.
Well, I would. I would. I'm a Michigan guy.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
So you probably like that part. Maybe your favorite.
In fact, I think that game is what helped the Ohio State team go on to win the national championship. But so anyway, I love that part. Go ahead.
We'll have to circle back to that. I agree. Well, I appreciate you wearing red today, even though you're a Michigan guy.
There's a reason for that too, but not because of the documentary.
Yes, we've heard a lot of positive feedback. I think what has been really cool about the eternal side of this project is seeing people see themselves in the characters, for a lack of a better term, but players and also other people in the film. For example, if you haven't seen it, there's a part where a police officer approaches one of the players in kind of a low moment of his life on the side of the street in a car and ends up, kind of taking him in, and they had a conversation. And since then, that police officer has come to know Jesus because of this player's testimony. It's a beautiful dynamic of a friendship that has now grown, but also of a Black man and a white man and a police and a player, and all of these different dynamics that are culturally pretty sensitive. And it has been really amazing to see people who resonate. We thought people were going to watch this and they're going to resonate with the players. But actually, we've heard from so many people that say, oh, the police officer, I'm a police officer, and I totally see, like, seeing his testimony has changed my life, or seeing their relationship has healed things for me. And so God has used it beyond what we thought people would give feedback on, to kind of allowing everyone to see themselves in a different person in the film.
When you first started this series, this program, I should say, what was your initial hope or thought that what could happen? And then how much greater has it become?
I think that we hope just one person would watch it and be changed by it,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah, we kept coming back to the question on the nights where it felt really hard and there was a lot of work and a lot of conflict, honestly. We would look at each other and say, if this was worth doing for Brian, for one person that would watch this, would we still do it? And sometimes it was one of us would say no, and the other one would say, actually, yes, like, let's keep going. And that was a beautiful dynamic of working in partnership. But I think we hope just one person would watch it and be changed. And obviously the result has been much bigger than that.
Yeah. So take us inside the Ohio State football program, if you can. How would you describe what was really going on inside the football program from an athletic perspective? I know they had a good season. They lost to Michigan at the end of the season. But even more importantly, spiritually, what was going on in Ohio State football spiritually?
There's an event that the players put on, and I don't know if this started in 2023 or 2024, but they definitely did one in 2024, and they called it the fall kickoff. And it was basically a group of players got together and they decided they were going to do kind of a Christian event in the middle of Ohio State's campus. And they just grabbed the mics, they shared the gospel, they shared their testimonies, they ended up baptizing players in actually the same ice bathtubs that they use for football practices. And you'll see all that in the film. But that was just sort of a declaration that they decided they wanted to do, to say, hey, you see us as football players, but we're much more. And beyond that, they were meeting every week for a Bible study, and it kept growing and growing. And obviously, this is according to the guys that are in the film, but there was a lot going on behind the scenes. But it wasn't just this season. It actually started way back in the early 2000s, and they all kind of traced back to different players of saying, well, this guy really started it because he used to come with the Bible when no one else was talking about Jesus. And now we have Bible studies of 50 plus players. And so it's definitely been growing on the team over time.
Yeah. Can you take me back to 2000 or that period? Like, what was going on? Who were some of these players who really set a path that has continued to this day at Ohio State?
Yeah, Roy Hall Jr. is in the film, and he used to play at Ohio State. And he talked a lot about, they actually put on an event way back then for people to just come and hear the gospel. And so I don't think it was always as cool as it is now. You see a lot of college campuses doing this, and even Master Teague is in the film. And I believe he played not too long ago, maybe like mid 2000s or 2010s. And he even talks about, he was kind of an outcast on the team, and there's a story that Tim Tebow tells of the strength coach calling Tim saying, hey, we got this guy named Master Teague, and he carries his Bible everywhere, and I'm not sure how to talk to him. Can you help me? And so it definitely has become more normalized, but I think it's easy to look at this movement from the outside and think, oh, it's just a flash in the pan, or it's just for PR, for their, Instagram accounts. But knowing them on a deeper level now and really seeing the heart behind these events, it is not a flash in the pan. I mean, they're doing everything they can to help people find community and find real life change. And so that's been really encouraging.
Do you see this continuing at Ohio State? Because some of these players are gone. They're in the NFL or doing something else. Is this something that there's a culture at Ohio State where sharing people's testimonies and faith in Jesus is something that's going to continue?
Absolutely. I really believe that, and obviously praying for that. But I think it's a ripple effect that's not going to be stopped. And thankfully, even G. Scott Jr. shares and Trey shares that Sonny Styles, some of these other guys that are still on the team. I mean, the Bible studies are still happening, even though, the guys that are leading it left. So it's kind of a pass the baton situation. Yeah.
So in the documentary, you followed TreVeyon Henderson, Emeka Egbuka, G. Scott Jr., and Will Howard, to name four of them. What stood out to you about the way they shared their faith?
I think their honesty and their transparency, coming from a Christian household, going to a Christian university. Sometimes it can be very normalized, to share your faith, or you're very used to it. But putting yourself in the position of these guys who have totally different backgrounds, do not come from a Christian environment at all, or actually in a university that probably doesn't favor Christianity speaking out and using their platforms for good. I would say it's their humility and their honesty, and their vulnerability to do something like this. I mean, another insider information, Matt or I had no relationship with Emeka, Trey before this documentary. So they literally answered cold DMs from us saying, hey, we want to make a movie about your life and about the season. And obviously that took some time to build the relationship, but they were also honest and transparent when they really didn't have to be.
Well, that leads me to, as I was listening to you and preparing, it leads me to really, how were you able to develop that trust with these players? Because as you said, you didn't know them before you started this process. They responded to, someone they didn't know. How was that trust formed?
I'm really glad you asked this question. No one else has. And it was formed over a lot of conflict, if I'm being honest. And I think they would say the same. And not conflict in an argumentative way, but more so of, if we're going to tell the real and honest story, there's probably 100 different versions of this story, right? We're telling it from a lot of different perspectives. And there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen trying to make this be as accurate and as transformative as possible. And so through that process, we actually did Zoom calls probably once a week for months, probably 4 or 5 months. And honestly, some of those Zoom calls, we walked away like, is this even going to happen? I think we were all kind of just frustrated at how hard the process is to make something so vulnerable. And thankfully, we would always come back to prayer at the end of those calls and say, all of us on this call want the gospel to go forward. And maybe we don't agree on everything, but we agree on that. And so that one unifying truth helped us breed a relationship that was built on trust. And so we came out of it all agreeing that we're doing this for the sake of the gospel, and we totally believe that God will use it.
And when you say we all, you're talking about you and Matt plus the players and everyone else who's part of this process, correct?
Yeah, I would say the core was Matt and I, and then G and TreVeyon. We worked a lot together on ensuring the story was told in an honest way.
Did you ever want to give up?
Yeah. Yes.
So what kept, what ultimately kept you going?
Yeah, honestly, I'll say the same thing I said earlier about, would we do it for one person? It was that question that we kept coming back to. And I think doing a documentary, producing a documentary as a married couple there's pros and cons, right? There's obviously, we don't get a break when we're talking about it at night and at dinner, but at the same time, that partnership really helped us, because in the moments where maybe I was frustrated or overwhelmed, Matt was able to kind of help me see the bigger picture. And in moments where he was swamped at work, but then we had deadlines for the documentary, I was able to help him step out. So honestly, the partnership of working together, and also that looming question was, if it's worth it for one person, helped us get through the hard times.
Yeah. So when you think about all your hard work, putting this together, what would you say was your hardest decision that you had to make in balancing honesty, excellence, and humility in telling these players a story? Because that's sensitive work there that really has to be handled carefully.
I think the hardest decision we had to make was saying that it was finished, that it was done, because realistically, we could have probably gone back and forth for a long time on making, everyone that's in the film, everyone outside of the film, have everything they want in the film. I think Matt and I would probably both say we watch it and there are things that we would change even still. But at some point, you have to just say, this is it, and trust God that he will work all the things that you didn't see before together. And I think he really has.
Was there a story that you wanted to get into the documentary that Matt said no, and it left it on the cutting floor?
Oh my goodness. There were so many things that didn't make the documentary. And I'll just say one specifically, again, a little insider, but I did an interview with one of TreVeyon's friends, and that interview didn't make the documentary, and there were several interviews that didn't. but I loved it because if you meet TreVeyon, he's so pure and full of joy. I mean, like joy of the Lord all over him when you meet him. And his friend was telling me all of these stories about amazing things that he's done that no one will ever know about. And honestly, people probably still won't ever know about them because, he just told me in an interview room, just things that ways he's been generous with his money, with his time, with his effort, people he's helped. And I really wanted that to get in just to, add to his character. And it didn't make the cut, but, not everything can. So,
Yeah. Do you remain in contact with any of these players even to this day?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually just checked in with Trey and he reached out. So we do. And I think that bond will always be there. It was formed in a quick amount of time, but on a deep level.
Yeah. So since the release, I should back up. You said earlier that you really did this for Brian. You did this for one person, right? Well, since the release, Redemption has reached more than 44 million people watching Redemption, and obviously it has to have made an impact in some way in these lives. When you think of the scale of viewers, what does that say to you? How do you even fathom that something that you and Matt did because you felt God called you to do it has exceeded any expectations that you may have had?
I think it makes me want to trust myself a whole lot less and trust God a whole lot more.
Has that happened?
Yeah, I would say so. I think when Paul talks about God being the strength in our weakness, it's one thing to hear that verse and say that verse. It's another thing to live that verse, to have an idea you can't accomplish on your own or do things that you feel like hopeless about, and then just trust that God will show up. And I think that this has been a tangible reminder for me that he works best when I'm surrendered, not when I'm, biting at the nail and striving to get something done. And so I pray that this lives on and continues to be about him, because that's really why we did it.
Yeah. So in my research, as I wanted to prepare for this podcast as best I could, I thought I read that the documentary supports also the Tim Tebow Foundation. Is that true? And if so, how does it support Tim's foundation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so part of the because Tim and them were a part of it, they actually got they'll get some of the profits from it for the foundation, and they're doing incredible work. I would definitely recommend, honestly, looking up all that they do in the special needs community and the human traffic community.
Yeah.
I think Tim, a lot of people probably see him on social media, see him from the outside, and he's doing all the things, but he's such a boots on the ground kind of person. There's real movement and real life change happening with what their foundation is up to.
How long did it take you from concept to final edit and production to complete this work?
I wish I could remember. I know the edit was completed in, I want to say, 50 some days. We started in August of 2024 and wrapped in November of 2025. So it was just over a year, the project in its entirety.
So earlier in the podcast, Marlee, you mentioned, or you talked about excellence and effort, something you learned here at Cedarville, being for God, not for man. How did that principle guide you as you worked through this project, as pressure increased, as stress increased, as deadlines increased? How did that principle guide you?
I think that principle is what helped me be okay with being misunderstood. I think producing this documentary, when you're doing something at this scale, there's going to be times where you feel misunderstood, whether that's by people you're working with, whether that's by deals you're making or decisions you're making, and not everyone is going to agree. And sometimes you have to let those opinions fall where they will and keep moving and keep trusting God and seeking him for wisdom. And so I think, one, it helped me be okay with being misunderstood, knowing that I wasn't working to please everyone around me. I was only working to please God.
So what's next for you and Matt? You have another documentary that you want to produce, or what's on your horizon?
I don't have anything to share quite yet, but we're definitely getting excited about more docuseries and more work like this. So I would say this isn't the last.
So let me probe a little bit, if I may. So are you willing to go outside of the sports arena, or do you want to stay in the sports realm?
I think there are some pretty good stories in the sports realm that we're imagining, but I think we'd go anywhere. So we'll see.
How about Ann Arbor, Michigan?
I don't know. That might be crossing the line.
That'd be crossing the state line. We know that. So,
yeah.
Marlee, I've enjoyed talking with you. I look forward. I haven't seen it yet. I need to see it, and I will at some point. But let me end our podcast with this one question, this broad question. So, if faith truly is the real playbook behind Ohio State's championship season, which it sounds like it had a major role, what does it mean for how we define success in our life when faith was really central to Ohio State in 2024 and earlier?
I think that G. Scott at the end of the docuseries in episode 3 really sums it up. And he says, other people look at us and they say, oh, I'm going to start praying because I want to win a national championship. And he says, I don't think that's the right way to look at it, because God doesn't give us what we want just because we pray. And Romans 8:28 talks about God working together the things for good for those who love him. And it doesn't mean that all things are good. It means that he's working all things together for good. And so I think that really is the main takeaway, that just because God loves us doesn't mean he gives us everything good that we want. It means he's going to work everything together for the good because of that. And so I would say that's the main message.
Before I close, Marlee, let me ask you this question, this big picture question as well. So what did this documentary really teach you from a spiritual perspective?
I think that watching this documentary back and also producing it taught me, again, the transformation we can experience when we're in Christ. I think if we know Jesus for a long time, it's easy to get stagnant in our day-to-day, but watching folks that are experiencing his joy, his goodness, his mercy, his peace for the very first time and telling about it, there's something very infectious about that. So I would say it gave me a new win in my spiritual walk too.
That's a great way to wrap today's podcast, and a great lesson that we all can learn from as we go about our daily life. Marlee, again, I look forward to watching Redemption, and even though I come to that football program from a different perspective, as we've talked about, I will enjoy it because it's not about Ohio State football. It's about Jesus and what he has done in the lives of not just those football players, but in your life and in my life as well. So thanks for spending time with me on this week's Cedarville Stories podcast. It was great to be with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Cedarville Stories podcast, brought to you by Cedarville University. To learn more about Cedarville University, visit our website at cedarville.edu. And be sure to come back next week when we'll share another Cedarville story for God's glory.